What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Consuming Crime. It's your host, Jules, here. Another week, another murder mystery. And today I need to start pulling up the episode notes before I even start recording. I don't know why I keep starting. But before I get started into the episode, don't forget, if you're listening on Spotify or a podcast streaming network, like and comment and follow all the good stuff. If you want to listen to more Consuming Crime episodes, you can head over to the patreon.com/consumingcrime, and there's bonus episodes over there, as well as I do release a bonus episode every week at the same time I release these episodes. So like this one's going to get posted, and then at the same time it's going to get posted on the Patreon. And then if you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Hi, how are you? YouTube especially, we want to get those like views up because Spotify is just kind of like blowing out of the water right now, and YouTube's not. But we'll get there. And then for the people that have been listening to me, I appreciate you very, very much. Yeah, I think that's all. Oh, and then if you want to listen to a pop culture podcast, I have another podcast called Chisme and Chill, but instead of chisme, it's spelled like cheese, and chisme, if you don't already know, is Mexican slang word for gossip. I literally just I think I've been talking about like The Ultimatum, The Last Resort, 90 Day Fiancé spinoff, and like just like pop culture things. Sometimes we get into politics, but we haven't as of lately. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. I'm going to go ahead and read you guys like the synopsis. Again, we are continuing to cover Homicide Hunter featuring Lieutenant Joe Kenda. And this time we are going over, okay, so we're in season 3, and this can be watched or viewed on Discovery Plus. This one is called River of Blood, Season 3, Episode 2. Two hunters find a blood-drenched car on a remote road. Its owner riddled with buckshot. When Lieutenant Joe Kenda learns the car was reported stolen, he follows its trail to a group of unlikely suspects and follows them down a dark path of lust and revenge. On May 27th, 1992, we are at Pike National Forest. A gentleman by the name of Chip Reinhardt and his brother Steve had been hunting bear at the forest, and they came across no bears, thank God. I don't even know if is that legal to be hunting bears? Anyway, they were driving down Old Stage Road on the way home, and as they were driving, they noticed a car just parked in this kind of like suspicious area, and they immediately were like, no, that's kind of weird. Let's go see what's going on over there. So they drive over and they start flashing their lights at the car. Well, not only do they notice nobody around, but they can see blood splattered all over the front of the car. Once they see that, they decide, all right, you know what? We're not going to get out of the car. We're not going to investigate this further. We're just going to call the police. So they drive off, and on their way home, they call 911, let them know, the make, model of the car, where they found it, and then the police head over to the scene. So officers arrive, and they notice immediately that there's nobody inside of the car. And another thing that they notice about the blood is they notice that the inside of the car is really clean. Like there was no blood on the inside of the car, which was interesting, which means whoever was killed was obviously killed outside of the car. Officers look down on the ground and they notice a trail of blood. They follow that trail of blood over towards a guardrail. And after or past the guardrail, they see the mouth of a drainage culvert. They proceed to go inside the drainage culvert, and within a couple of seconds, they see a man facing down in the water, most likely deceased. So they call Lieutenant Joe Kenda onto the scene, and this is around 10:45 at night. Lieutenant Kenda arrives on the scene, and he starts looking at the body, and he starts noticing that there's very large wounds on the body, and there are definitely gunshot wounds, but they weren't like normal gunshot wounds. Like these were definitely wounds of like a large barrel shotgun. They brought the body outside of the culvert to look at it even further. And the cause of death seemingly appeared to be a gunshot. He probably bled out. On one hand, he had a large wound, which means it's probably like a defensive wound, and also another one in the upper abdomen, and then another one in the back of his left leg. They did find an ID on him, and on the ID, it said Ronald Whitlow, who was 31 years old at the time, and based on the picture and the victim, they assumed and concluded that this was the victim. While they were inspecting around the car, they also found 2 expended 20-gauge shotgun shells, which just confirmed the theory that he was shot by a very large shotgun. Because of the way that the blood was splattered, the car being clean, the way the blood dragged away, Lieutenant Kenda believes that Ronald was outside of the car when he was first shot and then attempted to run/crawl away, and that's where we get the trail of blood until he eventually collapsed in the culvert. So now the car. The car, they did figure out it did belong to Ron. But the funny part about the car is Ron had reported it stolen this past Tuesday. And so this was on a Wednesday that they found his body. Ron had stated to the police that a friend of his borrowed the car but never returned it. And that friend's name was Brian Signor. Ron had another friend named Barbara Wilson. Or actually, Barbara was more Brian's friend. So it was like Barbara and Brian were friends, and then Brian and Ron were friends. So Brian was borrowing Ron's car. Barbara was also with Brian when he borrowed/stole the car. The reason he had reported it stolen is because he let him borrow it, and then he was supposed to have it back by like 5 o'clock, and he just never came back with the car. And on top of that, he wasn't answering his phone calls. So he's like, obviously went to police and was like, this dude just stole my car. Police run background checks on every single one of them and find out that coincidentally, all 3 of them live in the same apartment complex. And as a matter of fact, Ron and Brian were roommates. They were roommates. So that's weird. If he stole the car, where the hell did he go if he didn't go home? So now it's time to go to the complex, the apartment complex. That's like their next step. They go to the complex and they talk to the manager, and that's when the manager tells him a little bit more about Ron. So Ron is a janitor, and he also does like quick jobs for like quick money, like labor jobs type of thing. Sometimes works in construction, and construction is actually where he met Brian. And that's when they decided to like be roommates. And this was only a couple weeks prior to the murder. So they were only living together for a couple of weeks. But other than that, he like always paid his rent on time, never really caused an issue, at least from what the landlord is telling them. Ron and Brian got along most of the time, but Ron did complain recently about Brian and Barbara taking his car. This is what the landlord is saying. So he's like kind of reiterating what the officers that took the stolen report said. And Ron was like really, really pissed about it, according to the landlord. And so when running Brian's record, they can see that he had been convicted of violent crimes and definitely had an assaultive personality. I didn't even know that that was a word until the documentary used it, but yeah, assaultive personality. He likes to hit people, apparently. So now it was time for police to go after Brian. However, we kind of trailed off of this and we like didn't go for Brian until later for some reason. So I don't even know why I wrote it down. Oh, okay, because they didn't even really try. They just went to knock on Brian's door, aka Ron's door, and nobody was home. So then they went to Barbara's door. And was she there? Okay, yeah. They didn't answer. Nobody answered the door. So they leave their information with the landlord and they let him know, like, hey, can you please let us know when Barbara or Brian make it home because we need to talk to them. Now their next order of business is contacting Ron's next of kin. In this case, it was Pam, Ron's sister, to A, notify her of his death, but B, see if she can provide any information that might help them figure out who did this. So they inform Pam of the news, and she is definitely devastated hearing about her brother's death. Has a very normal sisterly reaction to hearing something like that. And she starts describing Ron a little bit more for us. She says that Ron was very friendly. He was the type to take in strays, like kind of let anybody stay with him, which is not, don't do that, guys. Like, don't do that. But she does also provide a backstory on the way that they were raised, and that wasn't always the most sunshine and rainbows. She said that they had 5 siblings and their whole family was very dysfunctional. She said that she wasn't able to protect Ron as good as she was able to protect the other siblings. So unfortunately, Ron received a brunt of the physical abuse by their parents. Because of that, he did start struggling on and off with substances. But at this time, the time that the murder was happening, or that happened, Pam said that as far as she knew, he was clean and he was actually doing really good in his sobriety journey. Fast forward, the manager calls police and lets them know that Barbara is now home. So, of course, they get their things and they go talk to Barbara. Initially, she seemed really surprised by the news of Ron's death. And they go to ask her about the car. Like, all right, what's going on with this car? He reported it's stolen. Do you know Brian? What's the situation with that? And she lets them know that she actually moved there from another state. So her driver's license was not valid in the state of Colorado. Because of that, she was talking to Brian about needing to go somewhere to get her nursing license so she could start working. So Brian goes, okay, I don't have a car, but Ron does. But I don't know if he'll let me borrow it. But let me go ask him. So he goes, asks him, and that's when Ron says, okay, you can borrow the car, but I need it back by 5. And then Barbara's like, they agree, and they go. She does whatever she needs to do for her nursing. And then on the way back, they're kind of like, they kind of lose track of time. They go to a bar, they drink a little bit, and then they start driving back. And Brian was kind of like acting a little bit tense, according to Barbara, because he was saying like, oh my God, we're going to be so late. Like, Ron's going to be upset. Like, he was like scared of Ron. He said that he had like a temper problem. And to that I say, if you're really afraid of this guy, why are you late? Why did you lose track of time? Why didn't you just go do what you had to do and then come right back? Like, if you're so scared, you know? But anyway, on their way back, they got pulled over because Brian had made an illegal U-turn. And so when they got pulled over, the officer was like, okay, license and registration. And that's when Brian said, well, it's actually not my car. Like, either he didn't know where it was in the car or he just didn't have it. And so the officer said, okay, you have 2 options. I either take the car right here and I impound it for having no registration, or you just leave it here and then you can call your friend and tell him where his car is at. But like, basically you can't take off with the car. You leave it here, I impound it, or you leave it here and you call your friend and tell him where it is. As far as whether or not they called Ron to tell him where the car was, I'm going to assume that they didn't. Otherwise, Ron wouldn't have reported it stolen. Because he reported it stolen on a Tuesday. I would imagine this was probably on a Monday. So I don't think they ever called him. But anyway, on the night of the murder, specifically, Barbara is saying that she was with Brian and they were helping their 2 friends move like that whole night. So from like 8 p.m. to like 1 in the morning, they were helping them move. And their friends' names were Stephanie Richardson and Trisha Drew. They were partners. So according to Barbara, these 2 ladies are their alibis. They go back to the station, and that is when they call the county that pulled over Barbara and Brian. And they did verify Barbara's story. They, there was an illegal U-turn. They gave them the option. They chose to leave the car there. Whether or not they called the roommate, the officer does not know. Next on their list, because Brian's still not available, is to call Stephanie and Trisha. So they call them into the station and they go to question them both separately, just to confirm who they were with, where they were, and for how long. And they have the same exact story. They were moving their stuff, and Barbara and Brian, their friends, were helping them from around 8 p.m. to around 1 in the morning. So that would have been around the time that Ron was killed. So it checks out. All 4 of them are pretty like in the clear. So now it's like, okay, now what? Now where do we go? It still doesn't make sense though, because they were with the car. And to my knowledge, no, actually the car was not in the same place that Barbara and Brian left it.
So unless Ron went to go get it, which he wouldn't have, because how would he know? Because he reported it stolen. He wouldn't have done that if he knew Ron left it somewhere. Like, how'd the car get there? Like, that's kind of like the big question that we all have. Anyway, they finally get a lead on where Brian might be. And they figure out that he's at work. They couldn't have done that earlier, but whatever. So they go talk to Brian at his job, and they start asking him, like, if anybody would want Ron dead. Just, like, basic questions, trying to figure this out. And Brian told them that he did see a couple of guys fighting with him. Because according to Brian, Ron did currently have an issue with using cocaine. And he would often purchase on credit and then pay off the dealers at a later time, which created issues between him and the dealer. And he had seen him get into it before with somebody dealing him cocaine. I don't really know. Listen, I'm not keen on my drug dealers. I don't know any. But, like, I would imagine that the whole, hey, you know, I got you back later doesn't work. But we don't know. This was back in the day. We don't know. Now Lieutenant Kenda is thinking, okay, exactly where the car was found would make sense if there was going to be, like, a drug exchange. Like, they would meet there. So maybe there was a drug exchange that went bad. He didn't have money like he was supposed to, and the dealer got him. That's, like, the new theory, right? Except Brian wouldn't or couldn't say anything about the dealers. But he does tell detectives. But you know who would know is Stephanie, because him and Stephanie used together. Interesting, because Stephanie didn't say anything back at the station. I don't know why she would, because she's not going to get herself in trouble for using drugs. But anyway, they go talk to Stephanie at her home, her and Trisha's home. And initially she's like, what? No, I'm not doing drugs. Like, we didn't do drugs together. What are you talking about? And that's when Lieutenant Kenda's like, listen, I'm not going to bust you for using drugs. I'm trying to figure out a homicide case. You doing cocaine is the least of my troubles. So once he says that to her and she realizes, okay, yeah, there's bigger problems right now, she does admit to having bought drugs with him before. And she admits that they were using together in the last week. She even says that is exactly what they were doing the night before he was killed. So right after, probably a few hours after he reported his car stolen. When it comes to knowing the dealers and seeing their faces, according to her, she always stayed in the car. So she never really got, like, a good view on what they look like or their names or nothing. So she had, like, even less to give than Brian did. Now they're kind of at another dead end because they had these 4 people that were kind of connected because of a stolen car, and now they have nobody because all 4 of these people are each other's alibis. Until a woman named Julie calls into the station, and she says she is Ron's girlfriend. None of them mentioned that Ron had a girlfriend? None of them? Okay. I mean, it's not like girlfriends and boyfriends are in a background check, but, like, you'd think, like, checking their social media. Whatever. Anyway, they go speak to her, and she was very upset hearing about Ron's death and was concerned about what happened to him. So you could tell she was trying to get to the bottom of it as well. And so this is what she said. She said that Ron had been staying with her the last 2 nights before his death, and he still hadn't found his car. So he was relying on Julie and Stephanie for transportation. There's that name again. So if he was staying with her for the last 2 nights, okay, maybe he was that mad at Brian for, like, stealing his car and he didn't want to see him. I don't know, whatever. So that's what was going on. And according to Julie, the last time Stephanie was at her place with Ron was on Wednesday, the night Ron was killed. She said, according to her, Ron needed a ride somewhere, and Stephanie came to pick him up. And that was the last time Julie saw him alive. Suspicious, we're hearing this name again. And it's especially suspicious because Stephanie said the last time she saw him was the night before he was murdered when they were doing drugs. And now we're coming to find out, no, Stephanie, you actually picked him up and you were one of the last people to see him alive the night of the murder. So why are you lying? Because you know it looks bad or because you did something bad? And then why, right? If it's Stephanie, why? We're going to get into that. So they call Stephanie back into the station and she starts acting scared and worried, and they start telling her, like, if it's not you, you need to tell us who did it, because she's like letting it be known. They're letting it be known, like, Julie just said that, like, you picked Ron up the night of the murder. So what the fuck? I don't know if they said that, but you know what I mean. However, cops say that. And they even tell her, if you know who it is and you're not saying, it's going to be really bad for you, because we have enough to just say it was you. So you might as well tell us what you know. You know, typical lingo to get for cops to, like, get somebody to speak. So what she says is, I will tell you the truth, but first I want you to call in my partner, Trisha. Last goodbyes. Like, what are we doing? So they call Trisha into the station, and they kind of have, like, they obviously don't let them talk by themselves. So they have this interaction where it kind of seemed like Stephanie was pleading with Trisha in some way. And then eventually Stephanie says they're going to find out sooner or later. We might as well tell them. Bingo. All right, you guys, and there's still more to the story. If you can even, like, just wait, okay? They go to interview them separately, and Lieutenant Kenda goes to supervise the interviews from another room. Stephanie says, it all started 2 weeks ago. They were all partying together, all 4 of them, 5 of them. So it was Barbara, Brian, Stephanie, Trisha, Ron, and I want to say there was, like, other people there too. And then the party was, like, dying down, and eventually everybody leaves, either to go home or to go get something from the store real quick, and it leads to Stephanie and Ron being alone together. Stephanie said that they were doing coke together, and Ron got a little too handsy with her and eventually raped her at knife point and gave her an STD. So what Stephanie did after the fact was she told everybody. She told Trisha, she told Brian, she told Barbara, and they kind of were like, what are we going to do about this? Like, and Brian allegedly was the one that said, no, we're going to take care of it a different way. We're going to kill him. So this whole, like, borrowing his car and then luring him to this other place and all this stuff was, like, a plan, basically concocted by all 4 of them. Stephanie was going to tell Ron she found his car, but really the other 3 would be sitting there waiting. Barbara backed out the afternoon of the murder, very last minute. So that is when Stephanie went to pick up Ron, which is what Julie was saying about Stephanie picking up Ron that night. She told Ron, all right, let's go score some coke. Also, I'm going to take you to your car. The reroute to the car, Brian and Trisha were waiting. Brian shot him twice with a shotgun, so confirmed it was a shotgun. And Trisha went to shoot him with a pistol, but the pistol didn't go off. This is, again, everything that Stephanie is saying. And I don't know if of the 3 gunshot wounds, if any of them were pistol wounds or if they were all shotgun. I think they were all shotgun. But that explains why, the hand, he probably put his hand up, started running away, the back of his leg, and then the final shot in the upper abdomen. Brian was charged with first-degree murder, facing 24 years. He was actually the only one that did not confess. So he pleaded not guilty. Barbara was facing 14 years with conspiracy to commit murder, and Trisha, 16 years, or Trisha and Stephanie, 16 years, first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Later on in the documentary, Detective or Lieutenant Joe Kenda does question the rape allegation, and this is my thing. I don't like to do that. I don't like to question victims, especially when it comes to rape, because it takes a lot for women to come forward about it. The only thing that I will say, because you think, why would she lie? If she's lying, the only reason I can think of is because she contracted an STD. And how are you going to explain to your partner who's clean how you get an STD without admitting to cheating? The reason why detectives think that she lied is because after being raped by somebody, you wouldn't expect the victim to be alone with that same perpetrator multiple times after the incident. And according to many different counts, many different stories, even on Stephanie's own account, she was alone with him several times after the incident occurred. So that's why detectives question it. As far as who actually knows, who knows? You know, the world may never know. It sucks if she is lying, because obviously it led to the death of an innocent man, you know? And Pam as well, his sister, believes that she was cheating on Trisha with Ron, and she just needed to explain away the STD. But anyway, that was today's episode of the podcast. If you want to hear more, I posted at the same time that I posted this on my Patreon, patreon.com/consumingcrime. Over there, I will be covering season 3, episode 4, and I'll read you the summary before you go over there to see if you want to listen to it. It's called Run for Your Life, and the summary is: when the slain body of a marathon runner is found just hours before a big race, it falls to Lieutenant Joe Kenda to solve the case. With the help of a trusted canine officer, Kenda sets off to find the killer himself before he strikes again. This one's going to be one of my favorites because there's a canine officer in it. So if you want to hear that, go on and head over to patreon.com/consumingcrime. It is $5 a month. You get, I think it's like 12 bonus episodes unlocked right now, and then 1 bonus episode every single week. But yeah, other than that, thank you for consuming crime with me today. You'll hear me next week. Bye.